Everyone thinks they know my biggest tragedy. Adelaide, 1995. The crash that nearly killed me. That is where every story about me begins, and it is where every story about me ends. That is not where the real story is. 6 years after Adelaide, I said something to a reporter that almost nobody paused to think about. That affected me more than anyone could see from the outside. Fear played a part. That sentence was not about Adelaide. It was about a different crash, a much smaller one, that happened 6 years later. And I want to tell you about that year properly, for the first time. Let me tell you who I am first. 2 Formula One World Championships, 1998 and 1999. Years of wheel-to-wheel racing against Michael Schumacher, in what people still call the toughest rivalry the sport has ever had. But this video is not about the trophies. It is about the year I had to defend everything I had won, while I was still broken underneath it. So let us not start at Adelaide. Let us start at the year I had to defend everything, while still not fully healed. Adelaide, 1995. Qualifying for the last race of the season. A tire failed on my McLaren at high speed. The car went airborne off the exit curb and hit the barrier at close to 200 kilometers an hour. I fractured my skull. I was placed in an induced coma. Trackside doctors had to perform an emergency tracheotomy because I could not breathe on my own. The world already knows this part of the story. I do not need to tell it again. What the world does not talk about is the few months after. McLaren had to ask me a simple question. Did I want to come back? I didn't want to even think about it. I really didn't want to think about it. But I was looking at all those years what I have done in motor racing. Starting when I was 6 years old. I had got so far in my career now. There's no way I can just now give up. So I said yes. And the world watched me get back in a car and decided that meant I was fine. Ron Dennis, my team boss, was there in that hospital. Years later, he described it this way. The worst was when I had to go to a hospital in Adelaide after Mika's accident. There was a possibility that a driver had died in my car. Fortunately, that never happened. David Coulthard joined our team the following year, in 1996, stepping straight into a team still carrying that memory. He later said something that tells you exactly what kind of environment I was returning to. All I ever asked from McLaren was an equal opportunity, and if that meant that I was slower than Mika, I had to deal with that. Everyone saw me get back in the car. Nobody asked what it actually cost me to sit in it again. Melbourne, 1998. The first race of my season defending the title. I won it. But that win came from a swap with my teammate David Coulthard, agreed before the race, and it caused enough controversy that the World Motorsport Council opened a formal investigation. Fans booed at the circuit. Years later, Ron Dennis revealed something stranger still. Someone had tapped into our radio and instructed Mika to enter the pits. Even my first win of that season carried a secret nobody fully explained. Then came Spa, in the rain. Michael Schumacher drove straight into the back of Coulthard's car at high speed through the spray, then tried to storm into our garage to confront him face to face. Coulthard put it plainly afterward. There is one set of rules for Michael, and there is one set for everyone else. He has a real problem admitting his mistakes. That is the paddock I was racing in. Not just against Schumacher on the track, but inside an atmosphere that could turn violent in seconds. By Monza in 1999, the pressure inside my own team boiled over too. Coulthard and I collided during the race. He apologized to me afterward at Park Ferme. Yeah, he apologized. David is a gentleman. But, and there is always the word but, it's so tough for 2 young guys with a huge ego who are just out to win a world championship. It was a very difficult situation and everybody was just putting David really down. So it wasn't good for the team spirit. Ron Dennis, they were really pissed off. Defending a title twice in a row was never just about beating Schumacher. It was about surviving an environment where every win carried a price, and some of those prices were never fully explained to anyone watching. 2001. The first race of the season. Back in Melbourne. A suspension failure sent me into the wall at 300 kilometers an hour. On paper, it was a smaller accident than Adelaide. Nobody was rushing a tracheotomy this time. But something inside me reacted like it was the same crash all over again. When it happened, I asked myself, was it meant to depress me, to diminish my motivation? That affected me more than anyone could see from the outside. A few months later, I said something else to a reporter, and this time I did not hide behind careful words. Fear played a part. Think about how rare that sentence is in this sport. Motorsport.com later summed up that season plainly. Häkkinen's 2001 season was a disappointment that started badly in Australia with a heavy crash induced by a suspension failure. Compare that to how Michael Schumacher handled his own broken leg 2 years earlier at Silverstone. Stefano Domenicali, who worked closely with him at Ferrari, described it this way. I remember 1999 when he had a problem in Silverstone, when he crashed and broke his leg. It was a problem, unfortunately, that a bolt was not tight enough on the brakes, but you never heard anything negative, and Michael say the team did a mistake. Michael never blamed anyone, even when the fault was proven. I stood up and said the word fear, even though nobody was forcing me to explain anything at all. I was not weaker than him. I had simply learned something at Adelaide that he had not yet learned for himself. Pretending you are fine only makes the wound grow quieter and bigger underneath. 3 races later, in Spain, life decided to test whether I had truly made peace with any of it. Final lap. I was leading Michael Schumacher by 42 seconds. That gap does not happen by accident. It happens when everything, the car, the strategy, the tires, all comes together at once. A win felt certain. My first win of the season and a real chance to fight my way back into the championship battle. Then a hydraulic leak took out my clutch. My car stopped dead on the circuit, smoke rising from the back of it, while Michael swept past to take the win instead. I said something right after that people still quote today. It would be good to get a punch back in the motorhome right now. I need to hit it a couple of times to relax. Formula One's own website described the scene afterward. Häkkinen graciously waved to the large and sympathetic crowd as he hitched his way back to park firm on the side pod of teammate David Coulthard's car. But later, there was no hiding his disappointment. Looking back at it now, one retrospective put it plainly. With Häkkinen retiring from Formula One just over 2 years later, crashes such as his high-speed suspension failure at the 2001 Australian Grand Prix played a role in that decision. I cannot say for certain exactly what changed in me that afternoon in Barcelona, but that was how I began to understand it. Not fear of crashing anymore, fear that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how perfect the race was, everything could still be taken away from me in a single moment I never saw coming. 5 years after Barcelona, I stood at the edge of coming back, and for the first time in my life I chose peace instead of one more chance at glory. By around 2004 or 2005, a feeling I had not expected started to return. A few years after that, I started to have a certain feeling. I felt mentally and physically ready to return to Formula One. I trained an awful lot. I flew to England to use McLaren's simulator. I spent days in the simulator. I was completely ready to return to Formula One. And as a double world champion, I knew quite well how to be fit for action. I'd be better than ever. In 2006, McLaren let me test their car. The results were good. Everyone who watched that test believed I could still do it. I did not go back. My own website later summed up the reason simply. He stated his reason as being that he wanted to spend more time with his family and did not want to hurt himself. In this respect, he also referred to the serious accident he had in 1995. I needed something to fill the space that decision left behind. I couldn't stay still. I wanted to activate myself again. Together with Mercedes-Benz, I said, okay, let's do the DTM. So I did the DTM for a few years. I had a real second chance to prove I was still a champion. I was ready. I said no anyway. Not because I was afraid of failing on the track. Because this time, I had learned to listen to the old wound before it forced me to listen to it the hard way. Here is the tragedy nobody wrote headlines about. Michael never said the team made a mistake, even after a proven bolt failure nearly ended his career. That was the culture I raised in. Strength meant silence. Fear was something you buried, not something you named out loud. I broke that rule. Quietly. In a short interview, without a press conference, without any drama at all. 25 years have passed since Adelaide. People still remember the crash. Almost nobody remembers the sentence that came after it, 6 years later, the one that actually explained everything. So let me say it again, clearly, one final time. Fear played a part. 4 words. Not weakness. The one truth a 2-time world champion needed a quarter of a century for anyone to actually hear.